Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we all call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone. So, let me tell you about my latest adventure. I have lately been thinking about Atlantis. Don't know why, it just seems to be constantly popping up in front of me, and when a fascination like that happens, I tend to try to figure out why. And to be honest with you, I was pretty sure I really had a pretty good take on exactly what Atlantis was and what happened to it and the magic that was around it. But I thought because I'd been drawn to it that maybe it was a good idea to check it out, to do a little investigation. And as with most of my projects, a little investigation goes into a lot of it. And then also the aspect of, oh my goodness, I didn't know as much as I thought I did, and I certainly didn't have a good understanding as to what the true foundations were that I was working from. So I got in touch with St. Google, and we have spent many, many days bringing me to a time of damn, I didn't really know I as much as I thought I did. So I went back to the very beginning as far as recorded history can go. And that said, you know, with a twinkle in my eye, I went back to Plato. And the very first mention of it in antiquity, sort of, is in two of him. Now Plato goes back to 355 BC, which would be about 2,300 years ago. And at that time, he wrote he wrote a lot of stuff, but he wrote two dialogues. I'll pronounce these wrong: the Timaeus and the Citius, something like that. And anyhow, he was talking about the continent of Atlantis, and he was talking about it as history. And the history predated him by about 10,000 years. Now, I kind of knew it went back to Plato, but what I didn't know after doing the reading I did on it, if you're like me, you thought that this was an island that was ruled by highly advanced scientists, and it was a blissful society, and the magic and crystals and all sorts of stuff were going on there. It turns out that actually that was actually Athens, and Atlantis was actually a very military, according to Plato, it was a military-run, warrior-like civilization that really did a whole bunch of taking over land, and it absolutely they took over a tremendous amount of land. They were warriors. They enslaved everybody that they took under their wing, so to speak, and the Athenians rose up against them. There was a war, and the Athenians won. And shortly thereafter, Atlantis was it sank because of earthquakes and all sorts of stuff like that. And so then I thought, well, okay, so where did the other stuff come? So I started investigating, and I went through Francis Bacon. I went through Helena Blavatsky, heavy-duty stuff, by the way. And then after that, Ignatius Donnelly, and then Lewis Spence, and my goodness, it go Aleister Crowley, Jane Roberts, Rudolf Steiner, of course, Edgar Casey. Found Frank Alper, who was a spiritualist channel, who talked about the Atlanteans having come from a planet called Atlantis. that now these people were highly evolved, and their planet was destroyed 90,000 years ago, and many of them fled to Earth, and that's how Atlantis got its start, according to him. I mean, I went on and on and on, and some of these theories were phenomenal. And then I realized, okay, so wait a minute, everybody, channels and philosophers are all saying there was an Atlantis. And as far as Edgar Casey stuff went, yeah, some of the places that he said actually have turned up, so that in many ways, you know, a little bit of credence goes there. But I kept wondering, okay, so who were these people, and how did I mean, I understand how all of the stories as to what it was and who they were. It's kind of like that telephone game. You whisper into one person's ear, and then by the time it gets to the end, it's a completely different story. And that appears to be what has happened here. And so I went to, because we're talking about channelers and prophets, the one that I truly respect, even above and beyond a lot of the ones that prior to the last 5 or 6 years I thought were fabulous, is Billy Meier, because his material has proved authentic. It's been proved true. It's and so I thought, well, I'm pretty sure he's talked about everything under the sun, from fungus and toenails to planetary alignments. Maybe not the fungus, but he's been doing this for so long that he's covered just about every topic. And I want to know who these people were that were on this island, and what really took place. So my authority in the field is a good friend, Mark Snider. He is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best authorities out there on the Billy Meier material, unless you want to talk German, and then of course you can go straight to the source, but I don't, and so I go to Mark. So Mark is with me today, and I want to welcome you to the show, Mark. I'm so glad you're here to help clear up my befuddlement, because it's amazing. And there were 4 Atlantises. Who knew?
Well, hi, Barbara. It's great to be on your show again. And, you know, I've studied the Atlantis stuff for quite a while, and I still feel like I'm scratching the surface. We've got a couple hours of material here easily to get through, and I still don't think I'm to the core of it yet. So we'll have to see how it goes. How are you this morning?
I'm excited, because I've read some of Billy's material. I've gone through several of the contexts. Some of them are a little, well, some of them are contradictory to a point, but I'm fascinated, because it feels like with Billy's material, these people have been coming to this planet to make war on each other for thousands and thousands of years.
Let me maybe
start at the
a
beginning
good place.
if you can find it.
Let me start where you left off just for a second here. You kind of piqued my memory on something. You were talking about Plato, and Plato wrote about Atlantis, and the Meier material sometimes talks a lot about reincarnation. In fact, it does talk a lot about reincarnation in the spiritual teaching. And the Pleiaren tell us that Plato has reincarnated in our age. And in fact, the second reincarnation of Plato was a man named Otto Heinrich Muck, who lived from about 1892 to 1956. He was born in Vienna, and he graduated as an engineer in the Munich College of Advanced Technology. He invented 2,000 different things that got patents during the time of his life. He flew as an officer in World War I and in World War II. he did research in the Peenemünde rocket research team for the Nazis. He was a scientific consultant after World War II, and he died in 1956 following a major accident. So I thought you might find that interesting that Plato has reincarnated, and he was working in the Peenemünde rocket research team. You know, that's where Werner von Braun worked.
Yeah.
Von Braun. And I'm trying to think the other fellow's name. It'll come back to me later. Von Braun's teacher. I'll think of it later if it's relevant. But I thought that you would find that interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and not only that, but from all I can tell here is after the last cataclysm, a lot of the energies, spirits that were there at that time have reincarnated into this lifetime. And the connection that I'm making, every time I found that every time there were many different times that these people from other planets came here, and basically it seems to be the Atlantis area that they always settle in. And now we're going back, tens of thousands of years, but it's almost
more than that even. There are, I don't, like I said, this topic is so large.
I know.
There are more than one Atlantis. There's more than one Atlantis. And there's one that goes back about 100. The original settling of the Earth after the fall of the civilization of Pelagon, according to the Meier information, and I'll preface everything by saying that 133,000 years ago, Atlant and his wife Cryotide came here. They settled on this island continent somewhere between South America and Africa. And they started to build, they came here with thousands of other settlers, and they started to build this beautiful city of Atlantis, and it wasn't long before you'd see this incredible architecture on the skyline. The city of Mu was, or Lemuria, depending on how you want to say this, was built later, and it was built in a desert area in China, in the China area, and it was built on two cities. On top, there was the top, the part on that was above the ground, and then there was a part that was below the ground. Agartha Alpha and Agartha Beta were below the ground, and they were connected by a tunnel system.
Now, is this in the area of the Gobi Desert?
Yes, this is in the area of the Gobi Desert, but at that time it wasn't even a desert, from what I can understand. So, and they built these cities at some distance because they knew that often war would break out, and they found if they lived as far apart as each other as they could, there would be a less likelihood for war. So that was what happened there.
Okay. So ultimately there was a war?
Ultimately there was a war. There was a great war during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. It's a rather long story, and I'm trying to think of the best way for us to kind of break into this. So let me see. There's a lot of information here. Let's drop back to about.
Let me ask you something here, though.
Sure.
When we're talking about these people, are these Plagurans? Are these from the Pleiades? What star system are they from?
A lot of these people came from Beta Centauri. Now,
Okay,
Beta
now
Centauri. Go
well,
ahead.
what I'm really trying to understand here is, okay, they came from other worlds. Were there indigenous people on the planet at that time, and did they intermingle, or are we talking before or did they or the remnants of them become the indigenous people?
The history of the Earth is very convoluted. There were indigenous people. There was a native Earth human that started to develop on the Earth about 12 million years ago. Homo sapiens sapien started to develop on the Earth about 9 to 12 million years ago. You get different stories from different people. Now, as we come closer to our time, there are also Neanderthals on the Earth. So if you go back 45,000 years ago, there were still Neanderthals on the Earth. Now, so there was a native Earth human, and that's normal for creation. On worlds throughout the universe, there's a natural process that occurs if that world is in the habitable zone around its star. And what develops are plants and animals, and if the conditions are right, the planet will become forested, heavily forested, and then animals will start to rise. And what happens is mankind will start to evolve, not from apes, but from what we would call kind of monkeys, for lack of a better term. We didn't actually develop from the apes. We developed from primates. And that happens. The creation, as the Meier material calls it, follows a standard pattern. And this is the normal evolution that occurs on worlds. And the reason that Homo sapiens sapiens develops on other worlds is because of the purpose of creation to evolve. And creation is the universal intelligence, the universal consciousness. It's not God. There is no God according to Meier material. The closest thing you can come to God is this universal intelligence, but it's not omniscient, it's not omnipresent, it's not like a God. It's a neutral, positive spirit, and it's evolving and it's changing, and it has created this universe and all these worlds in order to help its own evolution. And it takes a tiny fragment of itself as a human spirit. Now, every plant, every animal has a spirit form. But human beings have something unique. You can almost think of it as a fragment of the universal consciousness. And that's called the human spirit. And the human spirit resides in our midbrain in an area called the superior colliculus, which is what controls our sight and our gaze when we look around. So the primate, when it becomes Homo sapiens sapien, will get the spirit form. It will get the human spirit form. Now, what's different about the human spirit form is it has the capacity for consciousness evolution, which is different than plants and animals. Now, animals will actually advance in their intelligence and their instincts, and plants have what's called an impulse evolution. But human beings have something higher called consciousness evolution. And there are 7 evolutionary steps that human societies everywhere go through. So what was happening on the Earth is that these new spirit forms were incarnated into Homo sapiens sapien, and they had lived probably for a million or 2 years of reincarnations, which is extremely young, by the way.
Yeah.
Extremely, extremely young. So they were still basically cavemen. And the Meier material refers to them as the Evas or the bearers. So if you go back 133,000 years ago, when the Atlanteans first came here, there was a naturally evolving Earth human on the planet. So these Atlanteans, some of which who came from Beta Centauri, some I believe came from the Barnard star, but I think the majority came from Beta Centauri, which is, let me just stop here for a minute, because Beta Centauri is a star system that's about 300 light years away. Now, in ancient Aramaic, the term for Beta Centauri is Hadar, which means to settle, to be civilized, to be on the ground. So I find it kind of humorous that this ancient people would look at a star and name it to be settled or to be on the ground or to call it civilization. And the reason they did that, I think, is because they knew about these contacts and they knew that these people came here from other worlds. So the Atlanteans part of them came from Beta Centauri. This was 133,000 years ago. They were led by what's called an Ishwish, or a king of wisdom, named Atlant. Now, Atlant, as an Ishwish, says that he's in what's called the fifth stage of evolution. So briefly, and I'll try not to belabor this stuff because it's better if I don't just rattle on forever, I guess. Just interrupt me when you want to.
Okay.
So there are 7 evolutionary steps that human societies go through. And we go from primitive life, we go to rational life, and supposedly our civilization is in rational life. The 3rd stage is intelligent life. The 4th stage is real life, and amazing things happen there. For example, we master telepathy and telekinesis and genetic engineering. For example, these very advanced extraterrestrial human civilizations will start to develop ships that can fly from star system to star system with no time passing. The ships will also have a biological central intelligence. In other words, we're not using normal computers anymore, but biological computers that were created through genetic engineering, computers that are sentient, computers that really shouldn't even be called computers because they're sentient, they're living beings. And Semyase, Billy's third contact, her ship had a sentient central computer system that she could communicate with telepathically. So, and she was in a stage above the 4th stage. She was in the 5th stage of evolution.
And that is what?
That's called life and creational wisdom. And Atlant was in the 5th stage of evolution 133,000 years ago. And he was what's called a JHWH, also known as an Ishwish. Now, what happens at this stage of evolution is something really magical and amazing. And you have to go into, we have a spiritual consciousness and a material consciousness. The spiritual consciousness does not die. What controls the thoughts and the feelings of the spiritual consciousness is something called the Gemut in the German. We have a material consciousness, and what controls our material consciousness is called the psyche, and the psyche controls the thoughts and the feelings of the material consciousness. So in these highly, highly evolved humans, the spiritual consciousness, the Gemut, starts to be able to use what's called the the Schwinging wave in the German, which are these electromagnetic waves that come from what's called the electromagnetic realm of life. And these waves can have tremendous power. They build up tremendous power at times. And the psyche, which is your spiritual consciousness, can send this wave to the material consciousness where it can be used, where it can affect physical reality. And I'll give you an example. Semyase used this ability to harness the swinging wave to burn photographs. There were photographs of San Francisco when it was destroyed. San Francisco will be destroyed in the future in an earthquake, according to Meier information. And some of those photographs made it back, and they should have been destroyed. They had things on them that would have adversely affected our society if we'd have seen them. So Semyase destroyed those with her mind, and she burned the photographs. It's talked about in a contact report. Now, so that's where we get these stories of gods.
Yeah.
And that's where the confusion comes from, because we have the whole idea of demons and angels, and according to my information anyway, these things are the misunderstanding, particularly of native Earth humans. Billy has a very interesting book called The Psyche, which talks a little bit about what I'm describing here. So when I say Atlant was an Ishwish, that's kind of the whole background story of what that all is. Now, his wife was in what they call an Ishrish as well, the female version of a king of wisdom. Now, Atlant was a man of Lyrian descent, and I've heard he had broad shoulders and white skin. He was probably very, very tall. The Lyrians, according to my information, are kind of the root race for human beings in our galaxy. They came to our Milky Way galaxy 20, 30 million years ago. And then they fanned out and they started to settle in different worlds, and they were kind of warlike still. They would conquer other worlds. Now, to make things even more complicated here, as if it wasn't complicated enough already, the Meier information says that there are different space-time configurations in our universe. Now, what that means, we can get a rough idea. Kind of like different dimensions. So these Lyrians didn't come from Lyra Vega in our space-time configuration, but in a different space-time configuration. These people from Beta Centauri also were living in a different space-time configuration. So not only were they traveling vast distances, but they were switching over to our dimension, so to speak. Now, what exactly that means, I do not have my mind completely wrapped around yet. So these were human beings from other star systems in slightly different space-time configurations, which were at different levels of evolution than we are. And that's where we get this whole idea of these gods from the past. Now, not all these gods were friendly. And I think we'll probably get to that here before too long in our discussion.
What seems to confuse me, and of course, I have, as I say often, just enough information to get into trouble. And I think I'm about to step in it. It feels to me, from what I read, from what I gathered, and I've only had a couple weeks to do this, so I'm certainly not at the depth that you are with it. I found it interesting that these groups of visitors from different places appear to have come back to the same areas over a period of thousands of years, several times to destroy the same area, but it almost feels as though the Earth plane is their Armageddon. The Earth plane feels as though it is the Armageddon for these different time frames. They come back to the same place to destroy the same stuff over and over again. I mean, am I wrong?
Well, I don't think they came here with the intention of destroying things. I think they came here with the intention of living peacefully, the majority of them. Now, there is an exception to that rule. There's a fellow named Eris the Barbarian, who was one of these scientists who had like 200 leaders and sub-leaders under him. He had a scientist under him, interesting, a male scientist named Semyaza, who is also mentioned in Contact Report 191. Now, Eris conquered Hyperborea. So, I tell you, we're going to go into some wild stuff here today. Hyperborea, according to my information, was in the north, in the northern area. Hyperborea was a very beautiful and warm area. It was probably, and here it is near the North Pole. There was something fundamentally different about our Earth at this time. And I'm not exactly sure why we would have this warm weather in this northern area, but
there was an axis shift, so that would explain that.
Well, the axis shift happened afterwards, and we'll get into that. That's a very long story, when that happened and how that affected us. But the Meier information says that the Hyperborea was the area in the North Pole. It was very warm. It had like an eternal summer. There were trees that would produce oranges and all different sorts of... actually, before the axis shift, Florida was in this area at the top. So Florida was actually located in the northern regions before the pole shift and the upset of the Earth's axis. And the far north in ancient times was called Hyperborea. And the forces of Eris the Barbarian conquered Hyperborea in ancient times. Now, Eris was nicknamed the Barbarian. He was a king of wisdom in an area of science. Now, sometimes these king of wisdoms, if they didn't study the spiritual teachings, would turn out to be these murderous tyrants, which we'll learn more about hopefully in a little bit. So Eris conquered Hyperborea. His son went into India and conquered the area what we would call India and Pakistan. And that's why the country India of today is sometimes called Aryan, because this was one of the sons of Eris. So, yes. Now, interestingly, go ahead.
No, I just, and with all of these, with all of these conquering things, there were people there. So what I'm trying to gather is, where, I mean, are we now a mix of that blood and genetic material and what was here, or did they stay true to themselves and they just, enslaved the populations?
Well, that's a very, very good question. It was even Eris the Barbarian the evilest, the bad guy. He was like Darth Vader. Okay, if you want a good analogy. He was against the mingling of the people that came from the stars and the people that were living on Earth. But it happened. In fact, one of his own scientists mated with an Earth woman. And the offspring we call Adam today. Adam was 16 feet tall. He was huge. He was a giant.
Oh, that's
the original.
That's what else I wanted to get, to sort of touch on, because if you go into the Thoth material, he talks about the Atlanteans being giants.
Oh yeah, I mean that's very, very possible. Very possible. And not only that, there was genetic engineering done. And Semyasa did some of this genetic engineering. They produced giants through genetic engineering, some of which were nearly 40 feet tall. And they were extremely aggressive. And they ate everything. So I wanted to, you might find this interesting. Hyperborea, the Hyperboreans, eventually, in later times, the ones that were left, moved to Mount Shasta in Northern California. And there was a small city in Mount Shasta for a while that had 700 people who were these Hyperboreans. And they were the leftover descendants of a group of extraterrestrials that lived on the Earth in the ancient past. Sometimes you could see their golden-colored spacecraft coming out of Mount Shasta on the eastern slope, I believe it was, and sometimes Mount Mammoth. And on my website, I have a link to a photograph of one of these ships. The city was very deep in the center of Mount Shasta. The entrance was very well camouflaged, and it was on the eastern mountain peak. And these Hyperboreans, they would sometimes get visits from extraterrestrials who were coming here from other worlds as well. Occasionally, they would actually mix with some of the local areas, people in Mount Shasta there, but mostly they would keep to themselves. They had beam weapons sometimes that they would use to stun Earth people that came too close. Now, this is very interesting to me anyway. The Hyperboreans had a king of wisdom, another one of these king of wisdoms. So there were people on the Earth as late as 1995. They all left in 1995, from what I can tell. And I've even contacted some people from Switzerland just to, guarantee that or get as close as I can anyway to the truth. So there, these Hyperboreans were some of them were Ishwish. They were at the 5th level of evolution. One of these Ishwishes gave Hanok his great wisdom. And one of these Ishwishes commissioned Noah to build the Great Ark. And Noah did not actually build the ark by himself. And a lot of the large animals that were on the ark could have never made it off of Mount Ararat if they would have landed on the peak. And they did not land on the peak. The ark landed lower. Again, I was saying earlier, these polar regions during the time of Hanok were wondrous landscapes. They were they had palm trees, tropical vegetation. It was a paradise on Earth. And they had an uninterrupted summer. So this was Hyperborea before the pole shift. And by the way, Noah, who the Meier material calls Noah Codnesser, was about 3 meters tall, which was over 10 feet, 3 meters and 10 centimeters. So he was a giant. I know you find the giants interesting.
Well, it's because a lot of those biblical characters were known to be giants, and yet the Bible doesn't mention it, like Saint Patrick and some of the other ones. So the giants were a reality to the people who were writing the Bible stories, the Old Testament anyhow.
Let me drop a bomb here. The Meier material is very controversial.
Sure.
I don't know why I end up with this controversy. I'm not a controversial person. I don't like controversy. It seems like if you try to get to the truth, if you keep studying, you're going to find yourself in controversy.
Give it a rest, Mark.
Okay.
You like to drop the bombs. Go ahead.
No, I don't. I really don't. Okay, this is Quetzal in Contact Report 229 talking to Billy. He says, everything is complete. The biblical handed-down data and stories are in truth based on legends, deliberate lies, and falsifications, and on a deceitfully produced chronicle that is incorrectly arranged and wildly imagined. This also applies to the dates of the ancient genuine prophets, who they say are Jeremiah, Josiah, Elijah, and Enoch, converted to the Christian calendar of today, and then they give the birth dates. So a lot of even the names of these prophets are very different. Now whole contact report 229 is from the prophet that we call Jeremiah. And one thing I haven't done today at all is kind of lay any of the groundwork, which maybe we have some new listeners, or we'll have some new listeners to this show, have never heard of Billy Meier, Edward Albert Meier. According to Meier information, his spirit form has been on a mission here on the earth for the past 13,000 years. He has been the prophets we call Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. Now, the prophecies that come from Jeremiah are mentioned in Contact Report 229, and they are prophecies that are not prophecies. These are actually predictions, because the prophecies are things which may happen. The predictions are things that the Meier material says will happen. And it's quite interesting because the same phrase is repeated at the beginning of each one of these paragraphs. It says, when the prophet of the new time spreads his teaching, in the new time, the time of the great transformation has begun. It will start in the second millennium and lead far into the third millennium after the birth of the prophet Emmanuel. Now, the prophet Emmanuel, the Meier material says, is the real name of the person that we call Jesus today.
Yes.
They say that Jesus, the story of Jesus, is how would we put that? It's a dramatization or
allegory.
An allegory is a good way to put it, of the life of a man who really lived, and this man is Emmanuel. And when the second millennium ends and the third has begun, human beings will be blinded by gold and material values to such an extent that they will be counting tailors' silver coins in all countries everywhere. And even when human beings look up at the stars at night, they will see only gold, gemstones, and tailors. They will build cult places for cults to worship and will pay homage to a non-existent God as well as saints who are human beings canonized by human beings. The places for cults' worship of a non-existent God will become sites for merchants and money changers. The lenders who lend various acquisitions, temporary dwellings, and many inventions for a fee will become avaricious usurers. The judicial authorities will administer justice unlawfully and no longer punish the wrongdoers for their evil deeds, but will reward them by imposing penalties that are insignificant. Thus, the huge fire of injustice will smolder and burn, and will lend its helping hand to fornication, whereby it is inevitable that every city and town will be a place of fornication, which is degenerated in the worst form of inhumanity. And also the children and their children will live a life of degeneration in the worst form of inhumanity, and will become a cloud of blazing heat that burns and destroys everything. They will raise the old flags dripping with blood, and they will spread terror and leave uncountable deaths. The power of the world will ruthlessly abuse their power. The powerful of the world will abuse their power and allow the killing of innumerable innocent human beings. They will transform the building blocks of life into death-bringing weapons in order to destroy nature and to kill human beings in vast numbers. So these are the words of Jeremiah, a former personality of the spirit form that's currently in Edward Albert Meyer. So I'll let you comment.
Well, it does sound as though that's where we are today. But every generation has people standing on the street corner saying the world is coming to an end, repent. I just, from all of the prophecies that you and I have gone over, that Billy has gifted us with, so many of them are, have come to fruition, that we have been able to point a finger to and say that happened and that happened and that happened and that happened. So I know at one point, whoever Billy was talking to at that particular time, they said they weren't going to give any more prophecies because nobody was paying any attention to them. So all of this had to be way before that.
Oh, yeah, there are 700. Billy has written 40 books, and I recently heard 50, so maybe I'm underestimating. 40 books. He's written 40 books. He's written almost 1,000 contact reports now and hundreds of bulletins. So the Plejaren may not give any more prophecies. We may not get any more.
It seems like they've given enough if people pay attention.
Right.
And I think the last when we did one of our things on prophecies, I think one of the things Billy had said was that there would be 800 years of war, and then we would have peace. And I remember when we talked about it, I said, "Gee, I hope we're faster learners than that." Now I'm not so sure, but I want to get back to the Atlanteans because they fascinate me.
Sure, absolutely.
So I'm going to pull you back to Atlantis.
Oh yeah, that's fine. The Atlanteans came here 133,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Atlant and Caryatide, his wife, settled and built the great city of Atlantis. Caryatide's cousin, Muras, built the gigantic city of Mu, which was in the area of the Gobi Desert.
Mm-hmm.
Everything went well for about 1,800 years. Then Eris the Barbarian came. He settled in Hyperborea. He conquered Hyperborea. His son conquered India. And at some point, they were actually pushed off the earth, but then they came back. This was about 115,000 years ago. Then there was, now this is one thing that amazes me. Let me read this to you. And we're talking about Eris the Barbarian and his whole entourage, and probably at this point, we're dealing with, Eris has probably passed away, and we're dealing with his descendants. It says, after 2,000 years, during which the malicious refugees again created a high technical standard and produced many descendants, they returned filled with hate to the earth, and after they had increased their hate immeasurably against the extraterrestrial inhabitants of Earth, and were only able to preserve order within their own ranks with terrible punishments. Spurred on by inhuman hate, They, through research and knowledge obtained from it, drove up their life expectancy to more than 1,000 years. Their single wish was to gain control over the earth, for which reason every individual was taught wickedness and was instructed in the craft of war. And after 2,000 years, this hate-drenched people was so far along that it could venture an attack on the earth. So these people came back from Beta Centauri, and they came to the earth, and this was about 113,000 years ago. It describes Eris as a bestial, barbarous man. His power was feared, and they fell upon the earth, robbing, murdering, taking possession of the land. They conquered the distant land in the northern regions where the climate was very good. That's Hyperborea, which I told you about.
Yeah.
And this was before the upset of the Earth axis. And I mentioned that Eris, his son, fell upon the lands that today we call India and Persia. And he also struck the forefathers of the Sumerians, which is very interesting. And the Sumerians are described as a people of dark-colored, not Negroid, but more like Europeans, but dark-skinned. They had a tall growth, and they were the descendants of a group of extraterrestrials who came here from the Sirian star system. They settled on the Earth about 133,000 years ago, as the refugees from the Pleiadian star system did also. So, okay, the Aryan conquered India. He split off from Hyperborea, and after about 210 years, he joined with the inhabitants of Mu and Agartha, and they kind of went inside these other cities and stirred up hatred, and they were like terrorists, and they went into Greater Atlantis, and they stirred up wicked war activities. So this is kind of how they got this war going, and they stirred up this great conflict between Atlantis and Lemuria.
One of the reasons I wanted to do this, and it feels very much like, it's at least a 2-show discussion, not one, is because no, listen, this is I'm seeing synchronicities here.
Good.
And I don't know if it's just me, or because I see synchronicities, or if it's actually there. But this is a time frame where a lot of the people from that time frame have reincarnated on the planet. And if you'll notice, their way of warfare was to infiltrate with people who were sort of like gorillas.
Right.
Not the animal, but isn't that what's happening today with radical Islamist stuff?
Sure.
Aren't we is not the planet mirroring something that happened 113,000 years ago?
Like a repeating cycle.
Yes.
Or something. Well, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, and I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. It's very interesting how this all kind of evolved. Now, we get to this great war now, and maybe should we talk about that? Do you want to talk about the Great War, or because maybe we can cover that quickly? Would you like to talk about?
Sure.
Try to
cover the Great War quickly, Mark. Sure, go for it.
Good luck, right?
Yeah.
Mark cover anything quickly.
Yeah, I
Okay.
know.
This comes from Contact Report 59. Now, this is part of my struggle. I'll have to tell you this much, because the Meier information is all written generally in German, and some of it's been translated. Well, they only translated a little bit of Atlantis stuff into English. So I had a friend who had one of the books written by Wendell Stevens. Do you remember Wendell Stevens?
Yep.
Wendell Stevens was the colonel that brought Lee and Britt Elders. He was a colonel in the Army Air Corps, and he brought Lee and Britt Elders over to do the whole investigation of the Meier case, and to test the photographs and the films and everything. And when it all tested okay to his satisfaction, one of the things he did was come back and try to get translations of a lot of this information. And Contact Report 59, he made a translation of, which is not a great translation. But what I did was, and my wife works at a law firm, so she took one of the books, and they have a machine which could make copies of the book, okay, and convert that into a text file, which I could go again and kind of clean up a little bit and make it an HTML page. So as far as I know, I have the only translation, the English translation of Contact Report 59 on the web. Now, the reason, you're dealing with a tremendous amount of work that people have to do to try to translate all this material, and for whatever reason, they've put this as a low priority on their translation. So let's go through some of this, and we can talk about it. And this is we're starting with the Great War between Atlantis and Lemuria. And the power of Atlantis and Mu, they were on a scale that we cannot really even wrap our minds around. The Greater Atlantis people had an army of 4.83 million people, which was equipped with fighter beam ships. So there were all kinds of incredible ships flying around the Earth at this time. They had a giant fleet of what they called 123,000 one-man destroyer ships. They had these heat weapons that could eliminate matter in a fraction of a second. They had what they called 24,000 overkill beamers, which had a crew of 10 men. And what they did was they took all these ships and they attacked Mu. And they melted Lemuria to the ground, okay? And then the Atlanteans went back and celebrated and thought they won. Well, the scientists...
I know what happened. That's why I'm giggling.
The scientists of Mu had discovered powers which allowed them to turn asteroids into destroying cosmic bombs. So they went out into our asteroid belt and they picked a suitable planetoid which they could use as a deadly weapon to send against Atlantis. So they went outside the orbit of Mars, and they found this planetoid. It was several kilometers in diameter, and they attached to it these engines, atomic electromagnetic engines. And they first had to break the asteroid, stop it, because it was in an orbit. And then they drove this asteroid towards the Earth and towards the Atlanteans, and It was incredible. As this
They
thing,
crashed the party.
well, they crashed the party.
Yeah.
There were a couple scientists who were on this planetoid who guided it in, I guess by hand for whatever reason, and so they destroyed the city of Atlantis, and what they did, and this, as this, well, let me read a little bit here what it says. It says, those destined for death saw the disaster rushing near. So they're seeing this thing, and this just started to appear in the sky, high in the sky, far away, in the northwest, above the ocean. They saw this thing, and suddenly there appeared this dark heavenly body, which raged and came nearer, and there was this glistening light coming from behind it. And this little glistening light became a monster in the sky, a giant within a few seconds. And it looked first like a falling star, but it rushed within a few seconds to a very close, gigantic size, blazing a fiery tail. And the people at Atlantis, they were fascinated and paralyzed. And their eyes were open wide in horror, and they stared at this monster, which at this point was still noiseless. They weren't hearing any sound. And then suddenly, they heard the sound, and it was like an unbearable howling sound when it entered the first layers of the atmosphere, and it was exposed to the friction. And two seconds later, this planetoid, it glowed like a supernova, and the contact report says it generated a heat of 34,000 degrees. And just the heat of this thing started to turn parts of the Earth into glowing ashes. And it hadn't even exploded yet. And at something like, and this is one of the questions about the translation, like 100 some odd kilometers in height, it exploded.
Is this the asteroid that had the power of 32,000 hydrogen bombs?
Something like that, yes. Exactly.
Okay.
32,000 hydrogen bombs.
Okay.
So you've read this before.
I said I did homework.
So when it exploded, the whole Earth shook in this huge explosion, and thunder rolled over the whole globe. The Earth was badly shaken, and it caused volcanoes, and two great parts of this asteroid, like two great fists, slammed into the Atlantic Ocean and slammed into the Earth's crust at the bottom of the sea. And the Meier information explains that it seemed like the Earth would die because, like you said, the impact was like 32,000 hydrogen bombs. And deep down in the ocean, the crust was torn, and the Earth's innermost hot and glowing magma came up, and the waters of the sea started to bubble and boil and rushed into the atmosphere. And, you know, part of this is from the crashing asteroid, and part of this is from the heat. And they said it went up to 90,000 feet. I can't even imagine that. So
no,
by this event, I can't either. So there was this gigantic tidal wave, which got to 2,300 meters high, which I can't imagine. And when it slammed into Atlantis, it submerged Atlantis in the speed of minutes, and without leaving behind a single living creature. And the capital, which was formed in the shape of a beam ship, was rent into pieces and sank underground. And this occurred about 11,500 years ago. So that was the story of the great destruction of Atlantis and Lemuria, which I think is one of the most fascinating things that I have ever read. And I hope you enjoy that. I always enjoy going over that.
Now,
so that was the destruction. Go ahead.
Haven't they found in an area where moon was, haven't they found sand that has been fused into glass, and the only way it possibly could have been fused into glass was from an explosion such as that?
Yeah, there's been several. There have been nuclear destruction on the Earth. There have been atomic wars on the Earth. There have been all kinds of catastrophes, and we live in a very strange time. We don't know our history.
In essence, there is evidence of this happening. I mean, at least physical evidence.
Scientists acknowledge that the Earth was hit by a gigantic asteroid about 11,500 years ago. And they acknowledge that there was a what they call a crustal shift, or a shift on the Earth's axis at that time. So this is the destruction of the last great civilization on the Earth. And what happens after, I think, is extremely interesting as well.
Well, there was a tsunami too. I mean, it definitely did a job.
Well, the Earth was it was just almost destroyed. The ecosystem took hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, to recover. And I can't tell you if it's 700 or 7,000 years before people came back. Eris the 11th was the first guy that came back. And Eris the 11th, I call the beginning of the Giza intelligences, which I think we've talked about, maybe. Did we ever talk about them?
I think we probably did, yeah. It sounds familiar, but then
okay.
Patrick was a Giza person too, so I could have my men mixed up.
So, I'll just go on, or I'll let you ask questions, or you want to steer us a certain direction, or.
Well, it's I'm still into it. It just seems like this Earth is just a place where people come to fight. They live in peace for a while, and then they try to destroy one another. And it's usually the scientists that are out lusting for power that are the ones that fuel the armies into deciding to take over and come into control. Is there something? I was going to say, is there something about the human spirit? But I'm trying to figure out if the human spirit is a mixture of all of the other cultures or species that have come here. Are we hybrids? In other words, do we carry a little bit of each of these planetary visitors within our DNA? And they all come in peace but end up in war. It's a little frightening. Nobody's ever come in peace and stayed in peace.
Not on Earth, not yet. That's what the mission is all about. That's why this very ancient spirit form in Edward Albert Meyer has come back to be a teacher on the Earth again. And that's what this whole 13,000-year mission is all about, is to bring back the teaching of the Spirit so that we can survive, and supposedly we do after 800 years, as you said.
It's I see such a synchronicity as to what has happened in it's time and time and time again, and what I find fascinating is it's not always the same star systems that come back here, but this seems to be a planet that supports. The Earth has to be unique to a certain degree to have this many different influxes of I don't want to call them aliens, because they are just like us, and
right.
We may even be a part of them. So let's call them visitors, for want of a better word. But they came here, like you said, to live in peace. And And they did, and they shared wisdom and they shared lots of stuff, but then suddenly something happened and their true nature came out. What is it that happens that turns brother against brother, literally? And isn't that just exactly what's happening to us today?
Well, part of the problem here on Earth is genetic. And this is a whole nother line of discussion in the Meier material, and I think it might be good to get into it. Can we do another break? Can we do a little break, and then we could get back into talking about the human evolution on Earth? Can you do breaks? Or is that not good? Like play some music? Can you do that?
I can give you 2 minutes and 36 seconds. Is that enough?
Yeah, I mean, is that going to throw you off? If not, I can just roll on.
Yeah, if you don't need a break, let's roll on, because they're not going to be able to put a break.
Oh, okay. All right. So if we hit a point where I just have to have a break, then we'll do that. But the Earth, about 5 billion years ago, was formed into a solid mass. And of course, there was no instant creation of human beings or planets as described in our ancient scriptures. The humans started to evolve naturally on the Earth about 9 to 12 million years ago, as I talked about. Now, the original mammal was something called if I can pronounce it, Adelocilius cromptoni. That's about as close as I'm going to get. It was something that appeared about 225 million years ago in the late Triassic period. Adelocilius cromptoni, kind of the common ancestor of all modern mammals. And the first example of this we found in a fossil by a guy named Adrian Hunt. He was a paleontologist who found this, I'm just guessing in the 60s or the 70s. So we have, this is kind of how life started to evolve on Earth. Now, the Meier material says that we are the remnants of 5 different kinds of human beings who are of extraterrestrial origin.
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
Okay. So some of these people, as we've said, have come from Beta Centauri. Some of these come from the Pleiadian star system. And others came here from Lyra Vega. And the whole story of the Illyrians when they were here is another discussion that we can get into. But I wanted to kind of pull Mars into this, because Mars is a part of our history as well. And Billy got to visit some of these planets. And he went in the 1970s when he was on Semyase's ship. They visited some of these, just not get out and walk, but just to orbit and even to fly at some lower levels. Okay, now what's interesting about Mars is that Ptah explained that Mars had large amounts of water, particularly in its rivers. Now today these rivers are filled with dust and volcanic ash. But the rivers on Mars were bigger than the largest rivers on Earth, bigger than the Mississippi River, bigger than the Amazon, any of the largest rivers. Today, Mars has these gigantic raging sandstorms, which just go everywhere, and they've covered a lot of the rivers and the canals that were on Mars. Contact 251 talks about in the future, the Earth humans that we are now will eventually repopulate Mars. And there will be 13 colonies on Mars in our future. And there will be this tremendous war that takes place between Earth and Mars. And these 13 colonies will be wiped out, and the planet will be devastated again. Now, the Meier material says that in our ancient past, they were technically advanced human beings from the Sirius system called the Creator Overlords. And they created a human race with a limited lifespan of 100 years. And these people bore barbaric traits because they were genetically manipulated for conflict. See, the people that were living in the Sirius system at this time were the descendants of the Lyrians, and the Lyrians had a problem with war. So the Syrians thought that they would genetically engineer out of themselves the need for, they would take aggression out of them, and they went too far with that. And they developed these people that would do their fighting. And they realized that these genetically manipulated people who they limited their lifespans to 100 years were very dangerous. And they realized that they were going to have to wipe them out. Well, these genetically manipulated people, they found out about this. And so they fled the Sirius system, along with certain benevolent, quote-unquote, benevolent creator overlords who were trying to save them from being wiped out. Well, they left the Sirius system, and they came to our system, and they settled on two planets. They settled on Mars and Melona. And Melona was another world that was in our system. There were 3 planets in our system that supported life in the ancient past. And on Melona and Mars, they constructed cities, pyramids, stations, and they led a pretty good life on Mars until Mars was wiped out. Melona was destroyed by the people on the planet. So these people were engineered for warfare, is what I'm trying to say, is the people on Melona and Mars. They were engineered for warfare, and they destroyed planet Melona. Mars was destroyed pretty much by what's called the Destroyer Comet, which is something we can get into. The people, some of the genetically manipulated people left Mars, came to the Earth, and they had to be altered somewhat. Maybe we can get into that. I never got exactly what happened to them, but they had to be altered for life on Earth. But these people that had been genetically engineered for war mixed with the Earth people. So the entire human race on the Earth now has this genetic manipulation. We were built for war, and we have a limited lifespan to 100 years. The normal lifespan for many planets is 1,000 years for human beings. So that's why we're in the mess we're in. Now, that doesn't explain everything, because the Atlanteans that came here were not genetically engineered for war, and they still had war. But we are fighting against this genetic engineering that occurred, a long, long time ago. And now this is part of our biology. And this is why Earth is off limits. And you'll find this in later contacts, is the intelligences out there many of them would just go ahead and wipe out the people on the Earth because of this genetic manipulation, because they see us as extremely, extremely dangerous. But
well, we are, and we're primitive.
Yes. But
I mean, I can understand why we're quarantined. It makes good sense. and yet, those groups that did come to the planet to live in peace had to have left some of their genomes here too.
Right. So this is very interesting because according to Meier information, there is what's called a high council, okay? And they have pretty much written us off here on the earth. The people that are in contact with Billy are part of his genetic ancestry back to Nocodamian. And the only reason we have contact with them is because of this affiliation with Billy's former personalities.
Spirit.
So this is how extreme things are on the earth. We have pretty much been written off by these higher intelligences. But we have one last chance through this teaching of the Spirit, which is extremely important topic. But what's really fun, and I'm glad we did this today, is it kind of sets the whole stage so that we can start to understand what has happened and who we are and what the challenges are. And
but that was part of the point. Who were they, and who are we in relation to them?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't. I truly believe that the originals, whoever they were giants. And
yeah,
I really, if you look at ancient Egypt, all of the huge statuary, I believe those were true to life. They weren't just gigantic whatever, they were gigantic because that was their size. And I think interbreeding, does kind of lessen your lifespan, and it does lessen some of your traits. You spread them out over long enough, we shrink, and I think we are shrinking. I know I am. So, and I know people personally that have some of the giant features, double rows of teeth, extra digits on their hands, and it runs true into their family. That these are traits that have come down through the family. Those are some of the characteristics that the giants were known to have, that we have records of and that we've seen the bones of. So, I know that in some way we are connected to this. It isn't just it's a group of people came here, lived a while, had a fight, and left. They left part of themselves here, and we're a result of that. So that understanding the Meier material to a degree gives you an indication as to what direction we might go in, and then might not. I mean, if you look at some of the bestiality that's taken place with some of these radical Islamic people or others, that are barbaric. I mean, is that just something genetically that they were prone to, and that some of the rest of us are not quite prone that way because you're spreading stuff out over 133,000 years.
Well, let me take a very, very short break. I want to get back into some of these issues you brought up because I think they're very interesting. Why don't you continue just for about 30 seconds to talk about the giants and this whole genetic engineering thing?
I'll pontificate.
Okay, great. I'll be right back.
Okay. I this material keeps coming up to me and hitting me in the face. Also, the material of Thoth, which goes along with all of this. If anybody is interested, if you look up the Emerald Tablets and you look for the Dr. Doral translation, he does go into Thoth, was Hermes, was another, Mercury, I think, and he was a giant, and he was a prince of Atlantis, and He left Atlantis when Atlantis went beneath the waves in the Master's starship, and he went to the land of Chem, which was Egypt, and that's where he took his wisdom, his knowledge, and everything, and he ruled there for, I don't know, something like 15 to 50,000 years. I forget exactly, but it sort of wakes you up to the fact that the way that we look at our growth as a species, we are not indigenous to this planet. From everything that I can read and figure, we are not just Homo sapiens, that there are other strands there. And if you look at our DNA, of the 23 strands of DNA, only one of them is activated. The others are not activated. So that we carry within us memories and characteristics and wisdom and insight and history from those other sources of our being. And to say that we are just Homo sapiens evolved from apes is to diminish the extent of the wisdom and the magic and the gifts that we bring into this reality. I mean, I will grant you that our bodies are avatars for a spirit, but that spirit is connected into the wiring that is here, and that would take us back hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. And if that's the case, when Mark was talking about the different stages of evolution, we have the potential inside of us to achieve all those. He only gave us 5. He didn't give us 6 and 7. But we have that potential inside of us. And it's important that everybody realize that potential is there. It's not that some have greater than others. It's we all have this potential. And it's sort of like driving around in a car. I drove around in a car for 20 years. And when I got a new car, it had bells and whistles that I still haven't discovered all of them. And it makes me feel like our spirit is in a vehicle that has bells and whistles and overdrives and all sorts of amazing things if we can only figure out how to push the right buttons. And if we push the right buttons, we can change the true destiny pathway of our species on this planet at this point in time. I don't want to see this planet become another battleground for races that are out there having trouble on their world, so they destroy their world and they come here to help us and then end up destroying us and sending us all back to stage 1 again. I mean, if it happens, it happens. And certainly with reincarnation, we're all capable of going and then coming back. And then, it's not the end of the world. The planet will survive us for sure. There's no doubt about that. It's survived before we were here. It's obviously survived several different planetary systems sending out colonists to come and try to evolve onto this planet. It's a little scary that some of them, they had, it sounds kind of like Star Trek in a way, doesn't it? A non-intervention. They could sit here, they could be highly evolved, but they can't mingle with us because they can't in any way influence our own evolutionary process. But our evolutionary process is already there. It's kind of like whoever comes and visits us is probably somebody that's been here before, and we have the memories in our. I believe we all carry our own hall of records inside of us in our DNA, so that all of that information is there. And it's available to us, and it's a matter of taking that journey, that inner journey to self-awareness, to discover where those little buttons are, where those where those things are hidden from us on a consciousness level. And part of that is evolving consciously and stretching ourselves into the spiritual understanding of why we're here and the fact that we're one family. And, I know that at this point in time, any real intelligent race is not going to come down here. So, just sorry. You're back.
Yeah, I've been back. I've just been listening. It's been interesting.
Oh, okay. So anyhow, I do believe that we have all of these different levels of awareness in us, and they've been there because we're a part of those that had those levels of awareness, but we don't know how to access them.
Indeed. I agree with you. There is a very interesting history on this earth, a very interesting it's I think if we understood our own history, most of our misunderstandings would go away. And I wish more of this that I've talked about could be proved, and maybe in the future, hopefully it will be. Now, I didn't know, did you have any particular direction you wanted to go? Do you want to talk about the spiritual teachings? We really haven't covered the Lyrians that much. There's probably more about the Atlantians.
We've only got about 10 more minutes.
Oh, is that all? I thought we had another half an hour. Okay.
No, because I have
break.
to. Yeah. Well, we went. We went through the break, but yeah. I still am really in a quandary because I know we're sort of quarantined, but that's never stopped them before from coming to the planet and trying to take over the planet. And it seems to me that every time they settle here, their ambition is to take over the planet. I mean, we happen to be here.
Yeah, it's the Giza intelligences were the last, what I would call, negative group that were on the Earth. The Meier information says they were pushed off the Earth in maybe the late 1970s. They were a splinter group of the Pleiaren. But before that 1995 year, there were something like 2,862 extraterrestrials on the Earth. They were in bases in Asia, North America, Switzerland. But in 1995, they left. For whatever reason, we didn't know why. There were a group of Hyperboreans on the Earth, as what I talked about earlier. There was a group called the Hasters, which were on the Earth. The Hasters, they were closer to our level of evolution. They were maybe 1,100 years more advanced than us. They came here from another galaxy. They were brought here by the Pleiaren. The galaxy they came from was like 483 million light years from Earth. Can't even imagine that kind of distance. They were brought here. They were about, like I said, 1,120 years ahead of us. They were very ethical. They had very highly distinct lifestyles. They were peaceful. They were loving. They live, and this is interesting, they live in the same time level as the people in our system. The Hasters, they were interested in us. The Pleiaren brought them here. They came here in what's called the Great Spacer, the Great Mothership. The Pleiaren helped them build a station in the depths of the North Sea. And one interesting thing about the Hasters is that their consciousness and mental related development were similar to the Earth humans. So, and this is something people aren't aware of, the Pleiaren are so much higher than us in terms of their evolution that they're no longer compatible with Earth people. In other words, they cannot stand to be in our presence because our vibrations turn out to be unbearable for them, and it causes all kinds of horrible reactions to the player, and they lose control of their body, and they have to use a technology to protect themselves from our thinking. Now, and this technology only works about a half an hour, and that's why there's no one else having contacts with the player, and because the only reason, and again I went into this to a certain degree, because of Billy's age, his spirit form is compatible with theirs. Compatible with their vibrations. Now, in fact, one person walked into the room, and I think the guy's name was Jacobus, one of the people of the Figu, walked into the room accidentally when Billy was having a contact with Semyase. She immediately kind of fell. She was hit by his vibration, so to speak, and literally lost control of her body, fell, hit her head on a table, and one way or another, she did manage to get teleported back to her ship, but she went unconscious, she fell into a coma, she had to be rescued, and Billy's contacts with Semyase were cut off for several months. She came back, reestablished the contacts, but she had a terrible relapse, and now the contacts with Semyase are completely over. And she's off somewhere for decades. It's going to take her decades to recover from the damage she got when she hit her head. So these extraterrestrials are not compatible with Earth humans. Now, what was interesting about the Hasters is that they could stay connected to us in our presence for 17 hours. Without any problems. But after that point, our negative vibrations start to wear on them, and they start to lose control of themselves. So that's how different we are, and that's.
So
go ahead.
So why are they here if they're not compatible?
They're not here. They're not here.
The Hasters were.
The Hasters were here. Something happened in 1995, I'm just a spokesperson here for the Meier material. Yeah. In 1995, the Meier material says they all left. And all the people that I've talked to in Switzerland say the same thing. There are no bases anymore. There are no extraterrestrials on the Earth anymore. Only the occasional contact Billy has with the Pleiaren here every, however many times, maybe 4 or 5 times a year, they'll come, and Billy will get a little bit more information and expand the contact notes a little bit. But the rest
kind of makes you think like the rats leaving the sinking ship.
I think so. I think we're very much on like a teeter-totter. We could go either way, and it's really, that's how important the spiritual teaching is. And that's really my focus. I love the history because I think the more you understand the history, the better frame of reference you have for all this. If you don't understand the history and you don't understand the background, then whatever I would say as far as the spiritual teaching, a lot of people would just ignore it, because they don't see how it could possibly be true. But I think we're in for a wild ride. And
well, I think, Mark, actually our next show we should do on the spiritual teaching.
That would be great.
And then just refer people back to this show for the background.
I love the background. I love the history. I could talk about this all the time. But
it's great stuff, but when you realize that they're not here anymore, that their contacts with Billy have been, he used to talk to him all the time. And
she used to land her ship in Switzerland outside in the daylight, and she would walk over to Billy, who would usually wait a couple 100 meters from the ship, and sit down, and they would talk right there in Smidrucci, Switzerland. And at that time, there were some 2,800 extraterrestrial humans. They were, in these bases. They were in the background. But whatever happened in 1995, maybe at that point they could see that Fukushima was inevitable. I'm purely speculating. I have no idea what made them actually leave. But according to the Meier information anyway, and it's really interesting because people ask me questions about extraterrestrials, and I tell them this, and boy, it's not very popular. But that's okay. People don't want to hear this, but that's okay. It really, and and I know we're running out of time, but the gravity of the situation is, I think, what you're getting at, correct?
Yeah. To me, it feels as though, in looking back at this, and I urge everybody to check out Billy's website. I put it in. I put it in the chat room. It's www.futureofmankind.co.uk, and that's his website. And
that's it's a website put up by a guy named James Moore in the UK, and it's the contact reports. There are also websites to FIGU, but yeah, that's fine.
Well, and it's the material is amazing, but I think the thing that really gets to me is that after going through, going back to Plato and then coming through all of the other guys, that the material is there. The fundamentally, the only thing, and it's the same in a lot of it, is the name of the island, Atlantis. But the fact that it's been, there were 4 Atlantises, that this is something that has happened over and over again over tens of thousands of years, and it's I do believe is continuing, and where it may have started 133,000 years ago. It feels like, every 10 or 15,000 years there is upheaval, and I think we're at that point now. So, and I'm not predicting a meteor hit or anything like that. I think that the next revolution is probably going to be an internal one rather than an external one, and that maybe they withdrew their energy to kind of let us do it on our own and see if we could survive the pangs of birth. That's scary.
Yeah, the Henoch prophecies talk about 2 civil wars in the U.S. and the U.S. being divided into 5 different areas, which I hope doesn't happen. And I'd really like it if it didn't happen.
So would I.
I would like Billy to be wrong. So, people ask me, I say I would like Billy to be wrong about almost all this stuff, to tell you the truth. Because it's just staggering.
And yes, it is staggering, but you'll remember that when I decided it would be great to see how accurate Billy was, you and I were both shocked that it was frighteningly accurate.
It's frighteningly accurate. You can look at just the fires, which we can talk about sometime. The fires, and that's what's so strange about our society, is most, including me, I'm not as aware of these things as I should be. But they're just staggering.
Yeah, and from what I've seen, from what I've heard, and your guests last night were talking about the New Madrid fault line opening up again, and I've been saying that's going to happen for the last couple of years. It's been in my predictions. You watch, someday it'll happen, and I'll be able to say, see, I told you so, and so some smart aleck is going to say, yeah, you told us the 5 years in a row before it actually happened. But I keep predicting it will happen someday. But there's a lot of stuff out there, and Billy's predictions, he foresaw so much stuff, and accurately, and not vague. Not like Nostradamus, where you have to understand a quatrain. It's right out there. So,
right.
But I wanna thank you so much. I so appreciate your taking the time to record this with me, so that I could pump your brain yet again.
Well, my pleasure. I really enjoy it. It's so good to go over this, and I still feel like we've scratched the surface. There's just so much more here.
Well, we'll do another one on the spirituality because that's where my forte is. So, but I do thank you for some of the foundational work because it gives people a better understanding that Atlantis was not what the fairy stories are. These were people who were warriors, and they were out. They were not out for making nice with everybody. So I hate to say it, but that is truly part of the whole thing, and the fact that all of us have some of the genes, we have part of them in us. So they weren't strangers; they were part of our makeup. Not totally, but they didn't come here to create a slave race either.
One of the things that Billy said that I found extremely interesting in the book The Psyche is that the normal Earth human, his spirit form is about 4 to 5 million years old, but the people that came here that were in these other earlier civilizations that died on the Earth, because the planet that you die on is the planet you reincarnate on. So the people from the Pleiadian system, from Beta Centauri, from these other star systems, have a spirit form that's about 8 to 12 million years old.
Wow.
So it's a little older than Earth humans. So the people that died in these other civilizations have a different perspective on life.
Right. So we're going to have to leave it with that thought. But, Mark, thank you so much. I so appreciate it. And I'll get a hold of you, and we will aim at spirituality next time.
Fantastic, Barbara. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
I want to thank everybody for being here. And you can find Mark at Ohio Exopolitics. And he's on Blog Talk Radio, and his shows are fabulous. And I will thank you all. I wish we could have gone further and longer, but that's all the time we've got. So have a great one, everybody.